Hey everyone, this is Aaron Hill. I'm a lead artist here at Mold 3D, and today we're going to go over a typical asset creation workflow that we used on the Slate project. We'll first be going over blocking out the model in Maya, then followed by some high-res sculpting in ZBrush, along with some UV work to help us with the high-res scales detail. Then we'll move on to creating the low-res model. We'll then finish up by baking some maps and textures in Substance Painter for use in Unreal Engine. As a bad artist, I'll be given some concept art, and I'll start by bringing some of that into Maya as an image plane. And here I've brought in one image for the side view. And I'll go ahead and start blocking out the model by paying attention to the silhouettes. At this early stage in the modeling, I want to make sure I do it as quick as possible. I'm not spending a lot of time worrying about edge flow or anything like that. I don't want a lot of triangles, but other than that, block it out as quick as possible. Keeping the model into individual pieces at this early stage allows me the freedom to make very small changes or very wide global changes. This way I don't get bogged down in small details such as edge flow or worrying about how vertices are connected. In virtual production, it's very important to get things done quickly. Now my final step in blocking out the model will be to make sure it's combined into logical pieces. Any parts that are going to be mirrored, such as the back legs or the back feet, will be combined together so that those go into ZBrush as a single subtool. I'll go ahead and turn on transparency. I'll turn off ghost. Then I'll go up here to the preferences panel, go down to draw, and we'll set the back opacity slider. And this will determine how well we can see our image plane through our model. Now, after I've adjusted the back opacity slider to where I want it to be, with my image plane as the last subtool, I can now use the transparency button to toggle on whether or not I see through the model. Alright, with our image planes in place, we can now begin to sculpt on our high-res model. Now I'm going to start with the H-polish brush to get rid of some of the stretching and creasing that's happening from our blocking model. Going over it gently here with a little bit of H-polish. Then we'll move on to fleshing out the back legs a little bit with the clay brush. Get a little bit more form going on in the back legs here. Also following it up with the smooth brush to smooth out the form. Checking to make sure the forms look good. Go ahead and use a little bit of masking here to make this crease transition a little tighter, along with using the move tool, and smooth that out a little bit with the smooth tool. Continuing with the clay brush here to fill this part out a little bit, using some more clay brush and smooth tool on the back of the legs here. We don't see this part too much. It's going to be a clump of hair, so we're not going to spend too much time. And I'll continue to use a combination of the clay, H-polish, and smooth tools as I continue to define the form of the model. Here I have one of the toes as a subtool. I'm duplicating that subtool multiple times and then using the transpose tool to move it into place. This is a quick way of adjusting the model in ZBrush so I don't have to go back into Maya. Alright, moving right along to sculpting the high-res version of our head. We'll start out by using the damp standard tool here, and we're going to use that to help define some of the forms that just aren't present in our low-res model. For this particular model, we're not trying to do a perfect one-to-one match to our reference images, but we are trying to get a good general representation of the concept art for the director in a VAD workflow. This is because you will be receiving multiple revision notes from the director during the iterative process of a virtual art department or VAD project. Continuing to work on the head part of this model, we'll go ahead and check it with the reference image by going to our preferences, draw, and adjusting that back opacity slider. That way we can see through our model a little bit more. Now we'll go ahead and take that damp standard tool and start to follow some of these forms that we see in our image plane. Again, for this method to work, your reference image does need to be your last subtool. Alright, moving on to sculpting some of the shell here. I'm just using the damp standard tool and getting a very rough idea of where some of these forms should go. After I get a better idea of where the placement of these particular plates should be on this shell, I'll go in and define them a little bit more with the damp standard tool and pinch tools. Then cleaning it up with the smooth and H-polish tools. Now for the front section here, where the neck and the arms begin to meet, I've gone ahead and dynamished it already. Now I can use the clay brush to go ahead and smooth that transition out a bit. Using the clay brush a bit more and the smooth tool in conjunction with each other help me to smooth it out. I'll then use the move tool to help define the model a little bit better than what we had in just the blockout, not being afraid to make global changes as necessary, and finishing it off with the smooth tool. Now we'll continue on with UVing the high-res model, and this will be for helping us define the flow of the actual scales that are going to be on this model. So we're going to go ahead and use the smooth tool, or smudge tool rather, to straighten out these UV edges. And I also have a UV map on the actual model to help me see the actual flow of the UVs and where the scales are going to line up. So continuing with the smudge tool, getting the edge of the UV as straight as possible. Here I've selected some UV edges, then used the move and sew tool to go ahead and remove that UV edge. That created some stretching though, so I'll go ahead and select some UVs in that area. Select the tool smooth and smooth that out. There we have the finished high-res mesh, all UV'd. And I did lay it out in a UDIM format. That way we can keep the highest resolution for these maps in order to do scales in ZBrush. Now that I have the UVs done for the high-res model, I can go ahead and start some geo for the actual scales. I've got a few here already laid out. And I've also brought in the turtle shell itself, some pieces of the turtle, so that I can check the actual scale of the scales that I'm going to put on the model. I'll go ahead and duplicate them a few times and get a nice repeating pattern going for the scales. Duplicate those with transform so that they move the same amount of distance. Adjusting to get it as close as possible so that they repeat. Tileable. As seamless as possible. Checking to make sure that this silhouette from the side looks good enough. Now after I'm happy with the geo I've done in Maya, I'll go ahead and bring that into ZBrush and use the grab dock feature. What that'll do is give me a nice alpha of those actual scales that I can then later use in ZBrush for masking. Here I've gone ahead and brought that grab dock image into Photoshop. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure with the offset feature that it actually does tile. And while I'm in here, I'll fix any issues that are necessary. And by the end, I should end up with a nice, clean, tileable alpha texture. Now jumping into Substance Painter with our high-res model. that has UVs on it. We'll go ahead and import that alpha map that we fixed in Photoshop as a texture into our project. Then we'll go and make a fill layer, and we'll go ahead and turn off the height, roughness, metal, and normal map slots because we're only dealing with color. Go ahead and apply that alpha to our color slot. And since this is a fill layer, we'll go ahead and now scale this down to where the actual scales on the model start to resemble the size that we want for the final product. These are the exported maps from Substance Painter. These are the front legs, tileable texture all the way down, and the same for the front legs and the front neck portion. Tileable texture all the way down for use in ZBrush. Alright, moving right along back into ZBrush, we have our high-res model with the UVs on it. And now we're going to apply that alpha texture that we made in Substance Painter onto this model. We'll make sure this model has a couple of polygroups on it. That'll make it a little easier to apply. I'll make sure the back leg polygroup is visible. I'll go ahead and now import my alpha map. Then I'll flip it on the V axis vertically due to a bug in ZBrush. And with that imported, I'll go to the masking section, and I'll go ahead and mask by alpha, and that will apply our alpha map that we made in Substance Painter onto our model. And then I'll use a little bit of inflate to go ahead and actually make those scales pop out. And after that's done, you can go ahead and clean up the seams here if you didn't already do that in the Substance Painter alpha. Alright, moving on to sculpting the high-res leg straps that are on this model. Here I'm starting out with some masking in order to get the right shape of these leg straps. Done a little extraction of my masking in order to break it away from the model. Have it as its own subtool now. Getting these details in now is important because ultimately we are going to be creating a low-res model in which we will be baking some of the details into our normal map. So this process is about deciding whether you want to add in extra details in the high-res model versus in the texture stage. Go ahead and unmask everything. Now I'm going to try and clean up the edge a bit by Z-remeshing this. That cleans up the edge a bit for us. After that's done, I'll then go ahead and do some masking detail along the edges using the mask brush tool. Got a little bit of lazy mouse on there so I get a nice clean edge. After that, I'll then inflate a bit to get that geo to actually pop out. And do another inflate with a negative value to move the inside in a bit. After that's done, I'll go ahead over those leg straps with the smooth brush to clean up those edges and give it a nice polish. Alright, jumping into doing the low-res version of this model. We need to, nowadays there's so many polygons in our low-res models that we have to find a somewhat quick way of doing this, a procedural way of doing it. And for me, I use ZRemesher. That gets me a nice base to start with. It's definitely not a finished product. It's going to need some work in Maya or a different program, which we see me doing here. I've brought the model into Maya. Go ahead and continue to close holes and clean up the geo as needed. Can often require removing a lot of geo as well, spans that ZRemesher put in there that just aren't needed. Trying to keep the geo detail where we see it in the model the most. Less geo where we don't see it. Go ahead and clean up some welding edges here. Welding vertices together to remove unnecessary geo. Making some cuts to clean up the geo a bit. And after we've done that, we have a nice low-res mesh that we can utilize in our real-time engine. A few places we'll need some cleanup with the quadrod tool, so I've gone ahead and decimated a high-res mesh and brought it in so that I can use that as a live object in Maya. With the high-res and the low-res in the viewport, I can now set the high-res to a live object, bring up the quadrod tool, lay down a few points, and complete those polygons by left-clicking and dragging across. Sometimes you might have to go one polygon at a time if quadrod doesn't want to cooperate with you, but for the most part, it should get you where you need to go. After we complete our polygons, we can then move a few vertices to get a nicer edge flow. Getting a general overview of our model just to make sure everything is lining up where it should be. Now those new polygons I put in aren't smooth, so I'll go ahead and weld the model together and then smooth out those normals. Getting another overview of our model to make sure everything is no stray vertices or open holes are present. And I do like to work using the display edges mode set to soft and hard. That way any soft edges will show up as dotted lines and any hard edges will show up as solid lines. And this is a real quick and easy way to identify any hard edges that are present which shouldn't be, because all these edges on most of your models should be smooth. Setting the view mode back to standard so that we can get a clear view of what's going on. Putting less geo on the bottom where we don't see it very much, more geo near the top where it's going to be seen. And with that, we have our nice low-res model that's ready for our game engine. As a final step in the low-res modeling process, I'll go ahead and lay out the UVs so that they take up as much of the 0 to 1 UV space as possible. I'll also apply a checker map to make sure that there's even texel density over the entire model. This will help ensure that it's both performant for the engine and easy to paint on in Substance Painter. Alright, here in Substance Painter, we're ready to do some further texturing to the model. And this is the low-res version I have here. As you can see, I've already applied some smart materials to this model, and they don't do a whole lot just yet because we haven't yet baked in our high-res geo info. We'll go ahead and do that now using the Bake Mesh Maps feature. This is where we'll bake the high-res geo info onto our low-res mesh. Clicking on the Bake Mesh Maps button will bring up this dialog box. We'll go ahead and clear out any old high-res meshes we had by clicking on the minus symbol. Then we'll click just above that onto the High Definition Mesh button. This is where we'll bring in our high-res mesh, and this is a decimated mesh from ZBrush. Decimated as low as I can go to where I just start to see a change. Now that we've brought in our high-res mesh into Substance Painter, we can hit the Bake Selected Textures button, and this will begin the process of baking our high-res geo into maps that will be then applied to our low-res mesh. So we'll let Substance Painter run through the process of baking these maps, making some normal maps, ambient occlusion maps, and then we can see the result it has on the actual smart materials that can now use that high-res information. So with that done, we now have a lot of maps that have high-res information in them. You can see them listed down here in the drop-down menu, such as ambient occlusion and normal maps. Now that we've baked our high-res info onto our low-res geometry, we can step through some of the smart materials I've created, starting with bronze corroded. Then we'll add some text and a few more modified smart materials. And the more variation our model has, the more realistic it looks, so we'll add a little bit of whitewash. Then we'll add a little bit of bird poop. Don't forget the poop. As I'm working, I will go ahead and use this PBR validate filter. Find that under the filter section. I'll go ahead and drop that to the top of my stack. And what I pretty much want to see here is solid green. Anything else is getting out of PBR range, so a little bit of red is okay, but we pretty much want to see solid green as much as possible. Having gone through now as a final pass with the PBR validate smart filter, adjusting any smart materials as needed with levels or otherwise, I'm then ready to export to my real-time engine of choice. Here I've imported our model into the Unreal Engine. We can start to get a feel for how the material is interacting with light, and if necessary we can go back and forth between Substance Painter and Unreal a little bit to get the look and feel that we want. Here's the material I set up for the model, and I do have a tint on here that will give me some additional control. And the reason for that is that it's going to allow us to bring some of that green tint back into the color that the original material does actually have. But the lighting in this particular level is rather orange, and that's causing us to lose that green tint that this model should have. So having this tint control in our material instance is going to allow us a quicker turnaround time, adjusting it right in the engine in live preview instead of going back and forth between Substance Painter and Unreal constantly, which would help waste time. We now have this virtual asset added into our virtual environment that a director can now come into and do some virtual scouting around for our virtual production.